The rain hammered against the glass walls of Sterling and Associates as I packed my desk, each drop echoing the hollow feeling in my chest. 5 years of building relationships, closing deals, and representing this company with unwavering loyalty, all reduced to a cardboard box and a security escort. My hands trembled as I placed my Japanese tea set, a gift from my first major client, carefully between the folders. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mr. Tanaka had said it represented respect and long-term partnership. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across my former workspace, while my colleagues avoided eye contact. I could feel their discomfort, their relief that it wasn't them, their silent questions about what I might have done wrong. The elevator ride to the ground floor felt eternal, each floor counting down like a timer on my career. My reflection in the polished steel doors showed a woman I barely recognized. Professional blazer wrinkled, mascara slightly smudged, but eyes still holding that spark of determination that had gotten me this far. The security guard, Roberto, had been kind enough to help carry my things, his weathered face showing genuine sympathy. "You were always good to us, Ms. Chen," he whispered as we reached the lobby. Outside, Manhattan's chaos continued obliviously. Yellow cabs honking, pedestrians rushing past with their umbrellas, the city's pulse unchanged by my personal earthquake. I stood on the sidewalk, rain soaking through my coat, wondering how I'd explain this to my mother, to my friends, to myself. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, my former assistant. "I can't believe they did this to you. Everyone's talking about it." The message felt like a lifeline in the storm, a reminder that I wasn't invisible, that my work had mattered to someone. I'd spent years building bridges between American business culture and Japanese corporate values, learning the language, understanding the nuances of bowing, gift-giving, and the importance of face-saving. Mr. Yamamoto had once told me I was the only American who truly understood the concept of omotenashi, hospitality from the heart. The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the concrete like my scattered thoughts, and I realized that while they could take my job, they couldn't take the relationships I'd built. As I hailed a taxi, I made a mental note to call my clients personally, to maintain the connections that transcended corporate politics. The taxi ride home through Queens felt like traveling through different worlds. From the gleaming towers of Manhattan to the diverse, bustling neighborhoods where real people lived real lives. My reflection in the window showed a story of immigration and ambition. My Chinese-American features had opened doors in the Asian market that others couldn't access. The driver, speaking in accented English, asked about my day, and I found myself sharing more than intended. "Sometimes," he said, glancing at me through the rearview mirror. "When one door closes, the universe is preparing something bigger." His words hung in the air like incense, carrying wisdom I wasn't ready to accept. The familiar streets of my neighborhood appeared, lined with cherry blossom trees that reminded me of Tokyo business districts. I realized that home wasn't just a place. It was the connections we build, the trust we earn, and the respect we cultivate across cultures. My apartment felt different when I entered, as if the walls knew about my changed circumstances. The carefully arranged space reflected my journey. Family photos from Chinatown, awards from the company, artwork from Japanese clients who'd become friends. I set the cardboard box on my kitchen counter, its contents representing a life I'd built and lost in a single afternoon. The silence was deafening after years of constant phone calls, meetings, and the buzz of productivity. I made tea in my Japanese kyusu, the familiar ritual providing comfort in the chaos, and settled onto my couch with my laptop. My email inbox already showed several messages from clients, their concern evident even through formal business language. "Ms. Chen, we were surprised to hear about your departure," wrote Mr. Nakamura, the politeness masking what I knew was confusion and disappointment. The evening light filtered through my windows, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward an uncertain future. The weight of uncertainty pressed down on me as I stared at my laptop screen, cursor blinking in the empty space where my future should be. My savings account could cover 3 months of expenses, maybe 4 if I was careful. But the real currency I'd lost was momentum. I'd been climbing a ladder for 5 years, and now I was standing at the bottom of a different mountain entirely. The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. My mother's voice, concerned and loving, asking about my day. I couldn't bring myself to tell her about the termination, not yet. Not when she'd sacrificed so much for my education. Instead, I talked about the rain, about the changing seasons, about anything but the cardboard box that now represented my professional life. Her voice carried the strength of generations of women who'd faced uncertainty and emerged stronger. As night fell over Queens, I made a decision that would change everything. I would call my clients tomorrow, not to ask for anything, but to honor the relationships that had defined my career. The morning sun streamed through my apartment windows as I sat with my coffee, rehearsing the conversations I needed to have with my former clients. My phone felt heavy in my hands, each contact representing years of careful relationship building and mutual respect. I decided to start with Mr. Tanaka, my first major client, the one who'd taught me that business in Japan was about trust above all else. His assistant, Yuki, answered with the formal politeness I'd grown to appreciate, but I could hear the surprise in her voice when I explained my situation. "Tanaka-san will be very concerned about this news," she said, her English careful and precise. The call was scheduled for that afternoon, giving me time to prepare for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves as I walked to my local coffee shop, needing the familiar rhythm of neighborhood life to steady my nerves. The coffee shop on Northern Boulevard hummed with the multilingual conversations of my diverse Queens neighborhood, a reminder that I'd always been comfortable bridging cultural gaps. Maria, the barista, had seen me here countless mornings before work, always rushing, always checking my phone for client messages. Today, I had nowhere to rush to, and the freedom felt both liberating and terrifying. I ordered my usual, a cortado and a blueberry muffin, and found a corner table where I could make my calls privately. The first call to Mr. Tanaka went better than expected. His concern was genuine, and his questions about my plans were delivered with the careful respect that characterized all our interactions. "Sterling and Associates has lost a valuable bridge," he said, his English formal but heartfelt. "We will need to reconsider our relationship with them." The implications of his words didn't fully register until after we hung up. My second call was to Yamamoto Industries, a family company that had trusted me with their American expansion for 3 years. Mr. Yamamoto's son, Kenji, had been my primary contact, and his shock at my departure was palpable even across the phone line. "But, Chen-san, you are the reason we chose Sterling and Associates," he said, his voice carrying the weight of confusion and disappointment. "How can they continue to serve us without you?" I tried to reassure him that the company would assign someone new, someone capable, but his silence spoke volumes. The conversation ended with his polite but firm statement that they would need to reassess their business relationships. As I hung up, I realized that my termination had created a domino effect I hadn't anticipated. The afternoon light slanted through the coffee shop windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like my scattered thoughts about what these conversations might mean. The third call shattered any remaining naivety about my situation. Ms. Sato from Kyoto Textiles, usually reserved and formal, spoke with an edge I'd never heard before. "Chen-san, we are very disappointed in Sterling and Associates," she said, her English clipped and efficient. "We trusted you, and through you, we trusted them. Without you, there is no trust." The finality in her voice sent a chill down my spine. She explained that Kyoto Textiles would be terminating their contract immediately, effective at the end of the business week. I tried to protest, to suggest alternatives, but she was unmoved. In Japanese business, relationships are everything. They have broken our relationship. After she hung up, I sat in the coffee shop's afternoon bustle, suddenly understanding the magnitude of what was happening. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Emergency meeting called. Everyone's panicking. What did you do? The question stung because I knew I'd done nothing, and everything. By evening, my phone had become a harbinger of chaos. 5 more clients had called, each conversation following a similar pattern: polite concern, careful questions, and ultimately, decisions that would ripple through Sterling and Associates like an earthquake. The Japanese business philosophy of nakama, trusted partnership, meant that when you broke faith with one part of the relationship, you broke it with all of it. I'd been the human face of a faceless corporation, the cultural translator who made American business practices palatable to Japanese sensibilities. Without me, I was beginning to realize those carefully constructed bridges were crumbling. My apartment felt smaller as I paced, trying to process what was happening. The irony was bitter. I'd been let go without ceremony, treated as expendable, yet I was apparently the thread holding together millions of dollars in business relationships. The evening news played in the background as I tried to make sense of the day's developments, but I couldn't focus on anything beyond the implications of my clients' reactions. My phone buzzed with another message from Sarah. Mr. Sterling wants to know if you've spoken to any clients. He seems really worried. The question revealed how little they'd understood about my role, how they'd seen me as just another employee rather than the cornerstone of their Asian market strategy. I typed back, "I've been honest with everyone about my situation. They deserve to know." The response came quickly. "Can you come in tomorrow? They want to talk." I stared at the message, understanding that the power dynamic had shifted in ways I was only beginning to comprehend. The city lights twinkled beyond my window, each one representing dreams and struggles and the constant hustle of people trying to make their mark. Tomorrow would bring answers, but tonight, I sat with the growing realization that I might have more leverage than I'd ever imagined. The Sterling and Associates building looked different as I approached it the next morning, its glass facade reflecting a cloudy sky that matched my uncertain mood. The security guard, Roberto, gave me a knowing nod as I signed in, his expression suggesting he'd heard whispers about yesterday's emergency meetings. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending to a reckoning, each floor marking my transition from terminated employee to someone they apparently needed. Sarah met me at reception, her face a mixture of excitement and concern. "They're all in the conference room," she whispered, "and they've been there since 7 a.m. Mr. Sterling looks like he hasn't slept." The marble floors clicked under my heels as I walked toward what I'd once thought was the center of my professional universe. Now it felt like I was entering as a visitor to my own former life. The conference room's glass walls revealed a scene of barely controlled panic. Sterling sat at the head of the table, his usually perfect silver hair disheveled, while the other partners flanked him with expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed anger. Phone screens showed missed calls and urgent messages, and the whiteboard was covered with numbers that looked like financial projections or losses. When I entered, the room fell silent, 12 pairs of eyes turning to me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Thank you for coming," Mr. Sterling said, his voice carrying none of its usual commanding authority. "We need to discuss the situation with our Japanese clients." The understatement hung in the air like smoke, and I realized that in less than 24 hours, I'd gone from expendable employee to indispensable asset. The irony tasted bitter and sweet simultaneously. 7 clients have terminated their contracts, announced Janet Morrison, the head of accounts, her voice tight with controlled panic. Collectively, they represent $43 million in annual revenue. The number hung in the air like a death sentence, and I watched faces around the table drain of color. Mr. Sterling's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee, a detail that would have been invisible to me a week ago, but now seemed magnified. "They all mentioned you specifically," he continued, his eyes finally meeting mine. "They said they trusted you, not the company." The admission cost him. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his shoulders sagged slightly. Around the table, partners who had barely acknowledged my existence for 5 years now stared at me like I held the key to their survival. The morning light streaming through the windows illuminated the dust of their crumbling empire. "We made a mistake," Mr. Sterling said, the words coming out like he was pulling teeth. "We didn't realize how integral you were to these relationships." The corporate speak couldn't mask the desperation in his voice, and I found myself studying the faces of people who had wielded power over me for years. Janet Morrison looked like she might be sick, her face pale and drawn. Tom Bradley, who had always dismissed my cultural insights as soft skills, now couldn't meet my eyes. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. "We'd like to offer you your position back," he said, "with a significant increase in compensation and a new title, Vice President of Asian Markets." The offer should have felt like vindication, but instead, it felt like watching someone try to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. The trust had been broken, not just between the company and the clients, but between the company and me. "I appreciate the offer," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "but I need time to think about it." The words caused a ripple of panic around the table, and I realized that for the first time in my career, I held all the cards. "The clients trusted me personally," I continued, "and that trust was built over years of consistent, respectful interaction. It can't be rebuilt overnight." Mr. Sterling's face went through several emotions: frustration, fear, calculation. "What would it take?" he asked, leaning forward with the intensity of a man watching his empire crumble. The question opened a door I hadn't expected, revealing possibilities I hadn't dared to imagine. Outside the conference room windows, Manhattan hummed with its usual energy, oblivious to the power shift happening 42 floors above the street. I thought about my mother's sacrifices, about the clients who had trusted me, about the bridges I'd built and could build again. "I need guarantees," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Full autonomy over the Asian market division, a seat on the board, and the right to hire my own team." The demands were bold, probably too bold, but something in Mr. Sterling's expression told me they weren't impossible. "And," I added, thinking of all the times my cultural insights had been dismissed, "full implementation of cultural competency training for all staff working with international clients." The room fell silent again, but this time it was the silence of people doing rapid calculations rather than processing shock. Janet Morrison looked like she wanted to object, but Mr. Sterling raised a hand to stop her. "We need those clients back," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd just realized how close he'd come to losing everything. "If you can guarantee that, we'll consider your terms." The morning sun had shifted, casting different shadows across the conference table, and I realized that I was no longer sitting in my old life. I was negotiating the terms of my new one. The negotiation stretched into the afternoon, each clause and condition carved out like pieces of a puzzle that would determine not just my future, but the future of Sterling and Associates' entire Asian market strategy. By 4 p.m., we had the framework of an agreement that would have been impossible to imagine just days before. I would return as Senior Vice President of Asian Markets, with full P&L responsibility, a seat on the executive committee, and the authority to restructure the entire division. The salary was double what I'd been making, but more importantly, I had the respect and recognition that had been missing for 5 years. As I walked out of the building that evening, Roberto, the security guard, smiled broadly. "Welcome back, Miss Chen," he said. And for the first time in days, I felt like I was walking toward something rather than away from it. The next morning, I called my clients back, this time from my new corner office with a view of the East River. The conversations were different now, still formal, still careful, but tinged with cautious optimism. Mr. Tanaka listened as I explained the changes, the new structure, the guarantees I'd secured. "You have always been a person of integrity, Chen-san," he said after a long pause. "If you believe this company has learned from its mistakes, we will trust your judgment." One by one, The clients agreed to give Sterling and Associates another chance, not because of the company's promises, but because of their faith in me. By the end of the week, 6 of the 7 terminated contracts had been renewed, and I was fielding calls from new potential clients who had heard about the changes. The office buzzed with an energy I'd never felt before. The energy of people who finally understood that relationships, not just transactions, drove business success. My first board meeting was scheduled for the following Monday, and I spent the weekend preparing presentations that would reshape how the company thought about international business. The cultural competency training would be mandatory for all staff, starting with the partners. We would implement regular client relationship reviews, invest in language training, and create cultural advisory positions for each major market. As I worked on the proposals, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From the daughter of immigrants working in Chinatown restaurants to a senior executive with the power to change corporate culture. The rain that had marked my termination had given way to clear skies, and I could see the future stretching ahead like an uncharted map waiting to be explored. The following weeks transformed Sterling and Associates in ways that rippled through every department. The cultural competency training revealed how many small misunderstandings had been undermining client relationships for years. Partners who had dismissed my insights as cultural sensitivity now saw them as essential business intelligence. New hires were screened not just for technical skills, but for cultural awareness and adaptability. The changes weren't just cosmetic, they represented a fundamental shift in how the company viewed its role in the global marketplace. My team grew from 2 people to 12, each bringing expertise in different Asian markets and cultural contexts. We weren't just closing deals anymore. We were building bridges between worlds. The first quarterly review under the new structure showed remarkable results. Asian market revenue had increased by 30%, driven not just by renewed contracts, but by referrals from satisfied clients. Mr. Yamamoto had recommended us to 3 companies in his network, citing our renewed commitment to cultural understanding. The ripple effects extended beyond Asia. Our European clients began requesting similar cultural liaison services, and our domestic clients appreciated the more nuanced approach to relationship building. During the review meeting, Mr. Sterling acknowledged what we all knew. The company had been transformed by necessity into something better than it had been before. Sometimes, he said, looking directly at me, you have to lose something to understand its true value. 6 months later, I stood in the same conference room where I'd once negotiated my return, this time presenting our expansion plans for the South American market. The room was fuller now. My team, the original partners, and 3 new hires who brought expertise in markets we'd never served before. Through the windows, I could see the city stretching toward the horizon, full of possibilities we were only beginning to explore. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother. Proud of you, as always. The words carried the weight of generations of women who had crossed oceans and overcome obstacles to build better lives for their children. I thought about the cardboard box that had once contained my professional life, now replaced by relationships that spanned continents and cultures. The rain had been necessary, I realized. It had washed away what was keeping me small and revealed what had always been possible. As I began my presentation, I knew that I was no longer just building a career. I was building a legacy that would connect worlds for years to come.